Alright, welcome back to Paranormal Pete. This is the first episode where we're also streaming it to Twitch. I was thinking YouTube, but I figured Twitch might be better because it does have a category where, there's talk shows and podcasts and shit like that. So today, this is the third episode. Been away for a while because of complications with scheduling and shit, and then got busy with other shit. This episode, number 3, is going to be about how a lot of stuff in religion is really similar to the occult, specifically with Catholicism and other Christian religions. There's a lot of similarities between spells and prayer, and then just a lot of, even holidays and other practices in Catholicism and Christianity are borrowed from paganism and the occult. So, do you want to tell us what a spell is and then what a prayer is?
All right, so a lot of this was inspired by some reading that I was doing. There was a particular book, I don't remember off the top of my head because it had a really long name, but I initially was reading about, what was it? It was some kind of topic about traditional witchcraft, and I was reading about these court documents from some of these trials, and earlier on in the book, they talked about the differences between religion and witchcraft and stuff like that, and the concept of prayer versus a spell. So this particular quote kind of sums up the difference right here. It's by a guy called Keith Thomas, and he says, "The essential difference between the prayers of a churchman and the spells of a magician was that only the latter was claimed to work automatically. A prayer had no certainty of success and would not be granted if God chose not to concede it. A spell, on the other hand, need never go wrong unless some detail of ritual observance had been omitted or a rival magician had been practicing stronger counter magic. A prayer, in other words, was a form of supplication. A spell was a mechanical means of manipulation. Magic postulated occult forces of nature which the magician learned to control, whereas religion assumed the direction of the world by a conscious agent who can only be deflected from his purpose by prayer and supplication." So, basically, this guy's making the distinction between how it works. So in this concept, prayer is asking for things. You're asking God to help Alabama win the Super Bowl. That's a terrible example. It's not even the right genre, but you know what I'm talking about.
People do it.
Or,
People do it. Lord, let the Tide win this Super Bowl. Not Super Bowl. It's the fucking Sugar Bowl.
Sugar Bowl.
Totally
That's
different things.
Yeah.
Here's
Anyway,
some sugar cubes.
whereas if you were to gather up various ingredients and stuff, and you were to work a ritual for your team to win that sports match, those are two totally different things.
Just imagine guys with cloaks and shit decked out in the giant A and checkers.
Oh my.
Roll Tide roll. Roll Tide roll.
Oh, I remember what this was about. So I was reading a book about the history of familiars and about how they're spirits, not animals. Because a lot of people, no offense, but a lot of people don't know what the history of it is. They saw some beginner's Wicca book that says that if your cat comes up to you while you're doing a spell, then it's a familiar. No. A familiar traditionally is a spirit that helps you in magic, and a cat can't do that. A cat is literally an animal, and it smells something interesting going on, and it goes up to you because you brought some new herbs into the house. That's all there is to it. A familiar spirit essentially is believed to have the same powers as a witch. It can curse, it can do spells, so essentially if you don't treat them right, then they can curse you. And a familiar is a spirit that you would have a pact with. And there were two ideas as to where that came from. One was that it came from goblins and fairies, stuff like that. And then that developed into a belief that people were making deals with them. The other idea is that the church made up the concept of familiars, because in the church, in the actual church, not in whatever Christian witchcraft that some people practice, in the actual church, specifically the Catholic Church, and in most Christian churches, if it's not God's power, then it's the devil. So in that way, it's almost like they're trying to prove that it's the devil by saying, oh, they're working with the spirit. That must be the devil. They made a pact with the devil. They sold their soul to Satan. And that's where they would get that from. But anyways, that's a side note. I was reading a book about the history of familiars, and they were talking about the differences between them, but it also went into a lot of history, too, that a lot of people weren't aware of. So, we talked about what the difference is, and for all purposes of this chat, we're talking about the differences of a spell, meaning something where you are manipulating energy. You are causing something by what you're doing. Whereas a spell, you're asking another force, a prayer, you're asking another force to do something for you. So supplication versus manipulation. A spell would be, in this context, what we're talking about, manipulation of energy according to your will, and a prayer is asking for things. So, hypothetically, if you were a Christian witch, you could pray, but really, a spell, you can't do a spell, because you are saying your will. And what is the way? No, it's not our will. God's will be done. If you want Alabama to win the Sugar Bowl, help them win. Whereas a spell would be, I want them to win, they're going to win, and I'm doing this so that they win. Now, when we were mentioning that there's some differences, that's the differences. There are also similarities in practice between what people consider prayers and what they kind of fall under. So, if you were wording your prayer and saying that you're asking God for help, yeah, that would be a prayer under that definition of prayer. However, if you're going to say the rosary with the intent of doing something else, and you're not really, paying attention to what you're doing, you're just ritually reading out the prayer, that's basically a spell. You're grabbing these beads, and you're repeating words over and over again with an intent to cause a change. That's basically like a spell. So, while traditionally spells in witchcraft aren't using stuff like that, it can. Once you start getting into hoodoo and other works that involve, the Psalms and stuff like that, it starts getting a little hazy there. But traditionally, when you think of a spell, you think of, someone doing a ritual in a cauldron or whatever, putting in ingredients, saying an incantation, and then trying to affect change. Whereas, typically in church, you would think that people are asking God for help. However, particularly in Catholicism, there are similarities. And that also gets into, what are considered items of power. So, in witchcraft, you have different items, spirit fetishes, and other things like that, where people believe the actual item has power, as opposed to a lot of things. A lot of, neo-pagan religions tend to think that items and the tools are not important, it's your intent and how you're using them. And if that's your belief, then sure. But in some forms of traditional witchcraft, they do believe that items have power, specific items. And you can't just, draw it on a piece of paper and say that counts. They believe that the item did. That's in common with some things in Christianity and Catholicism. For example, holy water. When people use holy water, the stereotype of a parent coming in, finding their kid's Dungeons and Dragons game, and sprinkling holy water on it to chase away the devil, that's pretty much like someone just going into a room and smoke cleansing or something. Most of the time, they don't come in there with the holy water and say, God, keep away all the evil spirits, get this game out of my house,
My
blah,
mom
blah, blah.
would.
No. A lot of times, they just come in and they just sprinkle the water on. And just expect that the water's going to take care of it like that. And that's basically like when people are working magic. Here's another thing that's interesting, the concept of scapulars. Pete, are you familiar with scapulars?
Yeah, isn't that Isn't it like those brown cord things with the picture of the saint or something? And you wear them?
So modern scapulars are a miniaturized version of what used to be, which would be a full like tunic or or a shirt even that was a brown cloth. But to make it more easy to wear for modern people, they shortened it into this tiny little rectangle with two brown cords that go on either side of your shoulders. Now that has the promise attached to it. And a lot of them, it will even be embroidered on there or just printed on there. And it says, whoso shall ever die wearing this scapular shall not suffer eternal fire. So,
sounds like a cheap way to get to heaven.
And I've asked people about it, and basically they say the same thing about what's the concept of imperfect contrition. And basically it is that if you do this, you will get to heaven, but you'll be on the bottom rank, barely skating by, where someone else will be all the way up here.
I didn't know there was like different levels of heaven.
Well, that's what some people believe. So, but here's the thing. The way that it works in practice, it's basically like this item, this scapular, they talk about it as if this item is what does it.
Is your Steam downloading anything?
No.
Okay, you're lagging. It's probably just because I'm streaming and we're both on Discord on the same Wi-Fi.
No, Steam is not downloading anything.
Alright, continue.
Alright, so, and when you ask people about it, they say, oh, it's through God's power that this is being done, stuff like that. But when you look at how they live it in their life, most of the time they're not invoking God or anything like that.
No.
It's literally like, here, you're acting up and stuff, and they give their rebellious teenager a scapular to wear, as if them just wearing that scapular is going to do something.
What I've noticed in it's more so, like usually Catholics I see it with, a lot of Catholics they'll be Catholic, but they won't actually be religious. But simultaneously, they'll impose religious stuff onto the children.
Right.
And then, like, I'll also, like, shove it down other people's throats.
Right. So, when I see stuff like that, and people making promises that you're going to go to heaven because you're wearing this, and you don't even have to believe, that, to me, sounds like you're placing respect and belief of power of that item in and of itself. Because that person is not asking Jesus Christ, according to the Protestant belief, he's not asking Jesus Christ to be his Lord and Savior. He's not repenting of his sins. He's literally just wearing a piece of cloth that has a promise attached to it, which basically sounds like an enchanted object to me. It sounds like making a talisman or an amulet and wearing it for spiritual protection. It's pretty much what it is.
It's also similar to luck charms. Like monkey paws and shit. Rabbit feet.
Oh, Lucky Charms. I thought you said Love Charms.
I said luck charms.
You lagged out.
Lucky Charms.
But yeah, it's pretty much like that. What's the difference between you wearing a miraculous medal, is the official term for one such medal, and a witchcraft talisman, other than one is passed out by the church? It has a picture of Mary on it. It has nothing to do with God or Jesus. It's got a picture of Mary on it, and they claim that this medal protects people.
Is that the same thing? Now, I remember my mom, when I lived with them, she would make us hang some sort of little tiny silver medal on our door frame, but I don't think it was the one with the Mary emblems and shit on it.
So there's different ones. There's that one. There's also one called the Matrix medal, which is basically from this group out of Ireland that some people in my family are a part of, which in my opinion, from what I've researched, is essentially a cult. They have these pictures of Mary with blood coming out of her eyes, and they claim that this picture will protect people in the time of the Antichrist. And they say, well, if you don't have money, it's okay, you can get the small picture. But they also came out with these expensive gold-framed ones, 3D image, that they claim are even more powerful, and they're like $500 to $1,000. And what they preach is that those who have the means should get this to help protect their neighborhood. In my opinion, that's basically like selling someone spiritual protection. Because if it's all the same, why not just get the little picture? Why would you spend $500,000 on a more powerful picture? That's neither here nor there, but you see what I'm talking about. It's essentially placing magical power in this object. Of course, they're tying it into Christianity, but that's a picture of Mary with blood coming out of her eyes. You're not asking God for protection at all. You are buying an item which is essentially a protection charm.
That's just like having saint relics and other stuff. Like
Absolutely.
like the bottle of these supposed scrapings of the nails that were in Jesus's cross.
Right.
And other shit that you can buy.
It's very similar to, like I said, spirit fetishes and stuff. Like different groups in different countries that believe like dried animal heads, or like I saw this one that went on sale on a website. It was like an egg-shaped object cased in mud that had a duck's head coming out of it, with a padlock in the nose, and things like that. People believe the item had power. Neo-pagans don't like to admit that, but traditional witchcraft placed power in items.
Wasn't that thing was that a spirit box or something?
That was a fetish. Not too much is known about it.
But it did have supposedly a spirit in it, right?
Potentially, I don't remember. I have to come up with the listing. Not all fetishes have spirits. There's specifically spirit fetishes, and then there's other ones that are just simply an item of power, like something like a shaman's staff, with bones and things like that.
The Catholic Church at one point, even, I forget what they sold, but they sold, it might have been blessings or something similar to a blessing.
Indulgences.
Yes, indulgences.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. So basically what I'm trying to get at is they condemn witchcraft. However, in reality, in their day-to-day practices, a lot of stuff they do is pretty similar to what's going on in witchcraft.
A lot of stuff is borrowed from paganism and just in general occultism.
Right.
Like a lot of Christmas, for example, is pagan holiday.
Mm-hmm. And it's actually not the birthday of Jesus. The church decided that that was the day that they were going to celebrate his birthday. And from what I've read, it kind of sounded like they chose it because they wanted to put something in the place of Yule and all of that, or winter solstice and all that. They wanted to give the people something else instead, and they picked that date. From what I've read, there really isn't much historical evidence to show that that was his birthday at all, including the stuff like some sources have said that that star would not have been in the sky in that place at that time of year.
That star shows up in the summertime, it's either July or June. I feel like it's June.
So there's contradictions there. I mean, a lot of religions are full of contradictions, and that's neither here nor there. But those differences, between the two, of course, not everyone believes in those definitions. If your definition is different, well, then there's nothing I can say that will make sense to you if you make up all your own definition.
Isn't Easter pagan too?
Most of the Christian holidays coincide with a pagan holiday of some sort. They all are around the same time.
What about
Beltane?
Beltane?
I don't remember about that one specifically.
What about Beltane?
That one is in May, though.
May?
I think. I don't really follow those holidays. Really, the only one that I'm interested in is the one around Halloween.
Halloween?
The other ones. What's that?
I was going to say something and my mind totally went blank, but let's see. What is All Saints Day Halloween, or is that something different?
Samhain, which is spelled Samhain, Halloween, and All Souls Day are all around the same time.
Is All Saints Day different from All Souls Day? Or is it just another name?
I thought All Saints' Day was the day after, and the day before was All Souls' Day. I could be wrong. It's been a little while. Because All Hallows Eve, I'm pretty sure it was one and then the other one's day. I don't know. I'd have to look that up. But yeah, you're right. A lot of them coincide with those holidays. But yeah, like with the items of power thing, and that's also exploited financially too. People claiming to have bones of saints, like you said, the nail filings.
A lot of them are just scams.
Thorns, supposedly from the crown of thorns that Jesus had. First of all, how would you know that that's the actual one? What evidence are you going to find on a nail that's going to tell you that it's the right one? Because those areas were used to crucify lots of people.
Now, here's a question. So the types of Christians that get into like the Christian cult type stuff and the scams, like the nails, for example, they're like obsessed with that shit. Do you think that kind of follows the one commandment about not worshiping other idols? Because they're idolizing those objects.
I mean, when it comes down to it, it's physically impossible to live your life in accordance with the Ten Commandments to the fullest.
Yeah, I mean, they try their hardest, though.
Because when it comes down to it, there is no physical way, especially if you expand upon it. If you take it literally, well then yeah, thou shalt not kill. If that only means not to kill, then don't kill anybody. But some people expand that to meaning you shouldn't hurt other people.
Protestants will expand every single commandment. Like lust, people at my job have associated lust with even lusting food or like really any desire. Not just sexual lust. They'll warp the commandments into their own definitions to the point where like you're basically sinning 24/7.
Yeah, and see, here's my take on it. If you twist something after a certain point, it's really not the same thing anymore. Like when people say that they are a Christian witch, to me, that doesn't really make sense. The Bible, the founding text pretty much of Christianity, has phrases in the Old and the New Testament that condemn witchcraft, and it specifies which kinds. It says no divination, no spirit work, no necromancy, no any of that. So all those people using tarot cards and stuff like that, that's technically forbidden. And then people will come and say to me, oh, well, that was added in later, or that was human error, or oh, that was mistranslation, or oh, that was a king with an agenda who wanted to do this, that, and the other thing. Okay, well, if you're going to start saying that, you can technically explain away literally everything in the Bible. Oh, well, that part about not killing people, yeah, that was just added in because the king didn't want to have to deal with all these murders. You know, like, if you go under that logic, you're opening a can of worms that basically calls the entire book into question. And then I had someone say to me, well, why do you hold sacred scripture in such high regard anyways? Well, it's like, what else do you have to go on? You were not alive back then. You don't have any relatives from back then. How are you claiming that you're a part of this religion in any form if you have nothing to do with the history and the tradition of it whatsoever, and you're throwing out the book that is the core sacred text?
It's what your
religion's based off of.
Right. At that point, why are you calling it Christian witchcraft? You're basically practicing witchcraft, but you're worshiping Christian deities, and that's pretty much it.
What's interesting is those types of people will, you know, they'll warp their own opinion and definitions on the Bible, but simultaneously, at the same time, they'll believe anything this one guy says about witchcraft and Wicca and shit.
Yeah, I mean, it's
so much misinformation is spread because of that. Like familiars. The definition of familiar has warped so fucking much.
Yep.
Right now, I'm looking on Amino to see if there's any familiar posts.
And that's not entirely their fault, because there are actually published works that I've found in stores that are explicitly saying, does your cat take an interest in your craft? Does your cat come up to you when you're doing a ritual? They may be a familiar. And so these young, impressionable people are reading a published book without doing any more research on who's writing it or anything like that. And it's understandable. It really is understandable that they would think that, because they're reading books that are saying that. And unless they dig any deeper, how are they going to know? They're not.
Another thing is the type of people who get into that, like neo-Wiccans, they're usually gullible or just young people. Like I just scrolled through a post about a chick who's new to Wiccan, and she's 14. At 14, you really don't know what the fuck you're looking at, what you're reading into, or what to believe. You're very naive and gullible.
Pretty much what they're doing is they're going online or whatever, they're seeing somebody with crystals and sage, and they think it's cool, and then they say, well, I like it, so now I'm a witch. Well, and people will support that too. They'll say, well, if you feel that you're a witch in your heart, then you're a witch. Well, no. There is a traditional aspect to this. This is a practice that has been around for thousands of years in various forms, and you can't just go to the mall and buy a chunk of amethyst and some sage and burn it in your room and say that you're a witch. I mean, you can. You physically can. No one's going to stop you. It's not hurting me any, but does that have any basis in reality? No. Like, you need to research this stuff. I can't say how many times I've seen people making posts talking about they don't know where to start or whatever, even though there's like a specific beginners section that has stuff to start with.
Researching this shit is hard, though, to do it by yourself unless you know other people who know what they're talking about and can direct you.
Right,
like I said, there's so much
research.
Yeah, but I mean, there's just so much misinformation. Like,
True.
Like, I'm sure you've Googled spells and came across that one website where people post their spells, and it's fucking stupid bullshit pulled out of their ass.
Right. But that's the thing. Like, before I started practicing anything, I read about it for years. I forget how many exactly, it might have been 2 or 3. But I read about it and researched it before ever starting it. And at that point, you start to see common trends. You start to find out about the historical aspects. And when you read about that, you start to know. So I can read something now, and based on what they're saying, I can tell whether it has a root in something traditional or not.
Most of these people, though, don't look into history.
Most of it is literally like stuff from Tumblr or Pinterest. And that's neo-pagan stuff, is really what it is. Whereas a lot of the stuff that I'm interested in is the traditional witchcraft, which has a basis in history. So, when someone mentions a witch's bottle, to me, that means a jar that's got piss, bent nails, broken glass, all that kind of stuff. To them, from what they've read, they think they could put like some marigolds and some roses in there and think about white light, and that's a witch's bottle.
And
no,
it
that's
no
a spell
piss.
jar. That's a spell jar. You made a spell jar using ingredients that meant something to you to do something. Now, a witch's bottle is a term for a traditional item with specific ingredients. Even if the exact recipes vary, they have common things in them. For example, war water. You can't just fill up a jar with water and put some flowers in it and say, oh, well, yeah, I don't like rusty nails, I don't like coffin nails, I don't want to put swamp water or, Spanish moss in there. I want it to smell nice, so I'm going to use rose water, and I'm going to put some orange blossoms in there, and I'm going to call that war water. No. You can absolutely make that, but it doesn't really have any basis in reality to call it the traditional name. And that's what I was getting at with the other stuff. If you want to worship Christian deities and practice witchcraft, by all means, go for it. There are sections of that. But that's not really Christianity.
No, that's
And
really
it's
similar
really-
to holy water and other shit. I don't know if there's
Right.
any other types of waters and shit that the Catholic Church uses, but
Well, they also used oils and stuff
Yeah.
and incense.
A lot of rituals use incense, even the same
Sure.
kind.
Yeah. Frankincense and myrrh and stuff like that. So there's a lot of things.
I also just realized the Catholic Church uses a lot of candles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hang on, I got a phone call. Can we pause this real quick?
All right.
Yeah.
I guess I'll take the time to discuss the future plans of this podcast. I'd like to be able to do it more regularly, but kind of hard. I may or may not do some episodes by myself. Ideally, I'd like to start getting guests on every episode, because a huge inspiration of this is Joe Rogan, and he always has different people on. So I'm thinking next episode I'd like to do an episode on aliens really soon, and I'd like to do an episode on Bigfoot and other cryptids. But I also really, at some point when I start getting guests on, I want to get someone to talk about astral travel, and I want to get a Christian witch, or just some witch that's part of another religion. Like, people even claim you can be an Islamic witch, even though Islam tells you to kill witches.
But those could turn into shit shows, but I mean, I'd make good content.
You're not a good interviewer if you don't know how to push people's buttons. And if they rage quit, oh well. They rage quit. They don't know what they're talking about. He had to end it short. I don't know how long this episode was. I'm guessing maybe 30 or 45 minutes. A little shorter than the other ones. The other ones are like an hour or two, or like an hour and a half. But I think we covered some pretty good ground for what the topic was. There's really not much to the topic. We pretty much said everything there was and went off on little side topics. But tune in for next episode. We are now on SoundCloud and Spotify. Right now I don't really care if it's on like Apple Podcasts and shit or other platforms. But I may change my mind in the future if this grows a little bit, to reach out more.